Saludos, it's your host, Gabe Morales, continuing with our series on corrupt cops, the infamous LAPD Rampart scandal, in particular dealing with former officers David Mack and Rafael Perez and their ties to Death Row Records. It was a scandal that eventually broke up LAPD's community resources against street hoodlums or crash units. I may confirm some things you've heard before, but my story here may also differ quite a bit from some of the things you've heard about this time period and about individuals involved. I hope to dispel some myths about it, but it's my feeling that some of these things may never be proven and are a matter of opinion. Now, I know this subject has been covered in other videos, but I'm going to give my own personal take, as I've known numerous officers who worked with LAPD, several of whom were crash officers at the time. There's some really good ones, like Detective Bill Dunn, who's appeared on my channel before, and who I consider to be a good friend and true professional. And there have been some not so good ones, such as a former LAPD sergeant who worked in the Rampart division, who at one time was on good terms with me, until he found out that a Washington state investigator, who was a representative of the California Gang Task Force, had a personal beef with me, and until he found out that my mentor was none other than former Monterey Park Sergeant Robert Moco Morrill, who was the founder of the California Gang Task Force. We were supposed to be part of the so-called good guys, but the way that some of these individuals did us, it was really hard to tell them from the bad guys sometimes. And seeing how they mistreated us, I can only imagine how they must have mistreated suspects, arrestees, and convicts that they encountered. It's amazing to me sometimes how cops and corrections can act just like gang members, even fighting over turf. So before I get into some of the corrupt officers involved in the Rampart scandal, let me share a little background history of Los Angeles, LAPD, formation of the crash units, and Death Row Records. In 1771, a Franciscan friar, Father Junipero Serra, traveled north in New Spain, in what is now known as Mexico, up north into the San Gabriel Valley area, where he established the first mission in that area. The San Gabriel Valley is located just east of East Los Angeles. 10 years later, a group of 42 settlers founded the town of Our Lady the Queen of the Angels, or in Spanish, El Pueblo de Nuestra Señora de los Ángeles. For about 40 years, this settlement remained a very small ranch town. But by 1820, the population had grown to approximately 650 residents, mostly around an area today known as Olvera Street. The Los Angeles Police Department was formed in 1869, and the first police chief to remain in office for any length of time was a guy named John Glass, who was appointed to that position in 1889. LAPD is currently the third largest law enforcement agency in the United States, employing approximately 10,000 officers. The history of the crash unit goes back a lot further than most people are aware. It really began back in 1974 as the Total Response to Southwest Hoodlums, which was a 30-man unit out of the Southwest Division of LAPD, directed under Lieutenant John Salvino. If you remember in my Crips and Bloods episodes, by 1974, Crips had exploded all over Los Angeles, and Bloods had just started to unite under Pyrus, Rams, and other non-Crip gangs that banded together by the mid-70s under the Bloods umbrella. So LAPD was targeting the much larger Crips, who were expanding like wildfire, consisting of mostly black youth in South Central Los Angeles high schools and middle school aged youth. In 1975, the acronym TRASH was first changed to Community Response Against Street Hoodlums, before the final name was chosen, Community Resources Against Street Hoodlums. The Community Resources Against Street Hoodlums, or CRASH, was a specialized gang intel unit to combat the growing gang violence that was largely due to competing drug sales that grew worse during the crack cocaine epidemic of the 1980s and 90s. Each of LAPD's 18 separate divisions had their own crash unit assigned to it by then Police Chief Daryl Gates, and each of these had their own logo. The Rampart crash logo was a skull and a cowboy hat, with a pair of aces and a pair of eights showing. This is known as the dead man's hand. It is often stated that the Rampart scandal broke out in 1997 under then Police Chief Bernard Parks. But the formal dates of this scandal are not set in stone. Bernard Parks took over in May of 1997. 3 years later, CRASH was disbanded and replaced by LAPD's Gang and Narcotics Division. The Gang and Narcotics Division was replaced by the Gang Impact Team and Gang Enforcement Details in August of 2001. Death Row Records was an independent record label founded in L.A. that made gangster rap famous. It was started in 1991 by rappers The D.O.C., Dr. Dre, producer and Mob Piru member Suge Knight, and the real brains of Death Row Records, who was Dick Griffey, who had previously owned Solar Records and was best friends with Don Cornelius of Soul Train fame. The label became a national sensation, releasing many multi-platinum hip-hop albums by West Coast artists such as Dr. Dre, Snoop Dogg, and Tupac during the 1990s. At its peak, Death Row was making over $100 million a year. But due to criminal acts, gross mismanagement, and numerous artists leaving the label or getting killed, such as Tupac, Death Row Records and Suge Knight went bankrupt in April 2006. On February 9, 2022, former Death Row artist Snoop Dogg announced that he would acquire the rights to Death Row Records trademarks. Later on, I will do a more in-depth video on Death Row Records, Suge Knight, and the Tupac Biggie beef, as well as other individuals associated with that label. David Mack was a former LAPD officer. My sources say that Suge and Mack were actually not very close, and any real association they may have had was via sports. Suge was 5 years younger than Mack. As I described in previous videos, Suge played football at Linwood High School and played college ball in Las Vegas, and even played on the LA Rams for a short time period while the NFL was on strike. Mack joined LAPD in 1988, first working as a patrol officer in the Southwest Division, then as an undercover narcotics officer with the West Bureau Buy Team. Mack next moved to the late shift in West LA's division in 1990, whereby he began a relationship with Erilyn Romero, a 19-year-old ticket taker who worked at the Baldwin Theater. Mack was once awarded an LAPD medal in 1993 for shooting a drug dealer who reportedly threatened his partner, Rafael Perez. It is stated that Mack probably fired over a dozen rounds at the suspect, and that was a real ugly case, as several were between Perez and Mack. Officer Rafael Perez, and I use the term officer very loosely, was only in LAPD uniform from 1989 to 1998. But during that time, he did a lot of damage to the reputation of the agency and to the surrounding community. After finally being arrested in August 1998, he almost immediately implicated approximately 70 other officers from the Rampart Division as being involved in various forms of misconduct, ranging from bad shootings to consuming alcohol while on duty and having sex while on duty. Some of these officers were fired or forced to resign. Enough evidence was found to bring 58 of these individuals before the Internal Investigations Unit. However, only 24 of these were found to have been guilty of any wrongdoing, with 12 given suspensions of various lengths, 7 forced to resign or retire, and 5 were terminated or fired. The scandal was also a big part in the plot of the movie Training Day, starring Denzel Washington as a character who very closely resembled Perez. Paul Lozada is a former San Francisco detective who worked undercover for many years. He was an advisor on the movie Training Day and gave Denzel some advice, as we listen to him here.
My partner, Antoine Fuqua, was working on a movie called Training Day. So he said, "Hey, Paul, I got a script, man. Can I send it to you? It's about a dirty cop in L.A. I said, yeah, sure. So he sent it to me. I look at it, it was real flat. I said, nah, you got to punch it up a little bit. I know the guy's a dirty cop, but it doesn't have any pizzazz to it. I can change the dialogue. It's going to cost X, Y, and Z. He goes, yeah, Denzel wants to work with you. And I said, okay, sure. So I punch up the script. Denzel comes up. We start working together. I go back down. So we work with each other, change the dialogue. He liked the way I dressed. Because the guy, Raphael, dirty cop, he was one of the jump out boys. So, they wear like the jeans and they wear like a nylon jacket that says crash and they jump out. Well, like in San Francisco, I, like Training Day, that's how I dress. I wore the silk suit, the gaiters, blinged out, and I carried 2 guns. I had 2 carriage. Those are my holsters, by the way, that he has in the movie. So I told Denzel, I said, hey, look, I'm going to give you my lucky holsters. I guarantee you're going to get an Academy Award wearing these. He starts laughing and stuff, and he bet me a ring. So he gave me this big old rock of a ring after.
In the next 24 hours, you will learn about the streets, about the choices that will force a dedicated cop over the edge, all in the name of good. In the next 24 hours, the only thing more dangerous than the line being crossed.
Today's a training day, Officer Hoyt. It's your chance to give you a little taste of reality. You think you can handle it?
is the cop who has crossed it.
I will do anything you want me to do.
Will you? We'll see. If I was a dealer, you'd be dead by now. They build jails because of me. Judges have handed out over 15,000 man-years of incarceration time based on my investigations. You got today and today only to show me who and what you're made of. You hear me? That's it. That's what I'm talking about. First day on the job, you hit a $3 million seizure.
Police officer, get away from the girl!
No. We're not racking up arrests today.
You let him go.
What more you want?
I want justice, right?
Is that not justice?
That's street justice.
What's wrong with street justice?
Oh, what? Just let the animals wipe themselves out.
God willing.
It can't be like this.
Open your eyes. Can't you see? Police, we got a search warrant.
You ain't no police! They're these fools!
And I didn't sign up for this.
You think I'm crazy, right? We communicate and talk to me. Say it. Say it.
I think you're a road cop.
Learned a lot of things on these streets, boy. Good things and bad things, too. There's some profoundly evil people walking the streets freely right now.
I'm the police! King Kong ain't got nothing on me!
You never know, that's the point. It's gonna have to be a nice day, huh? It'll get darker, guarantee you that.
I myself know that I felt at one time or another more like Ethan Hawke. By the way, Perez was not killed by the Russians, as is shown towards the end of the movie, at the cross sections of Imperial Highway in Inglewood. But there are some Russian mafia in L.A. That'll be covered in a different episode. There were numerous events in the Rampart scandal, and I'm only going to cover some of the main ones. Let's examine a little further the timeline on the Rampart scandal and some key events that were involved. Javier Francisco Ovando was an immigrant to the United States and was a central figure in the scandal. When Perez was put on the stand during his trial, Deputy District Attorney Richard Rosenthal asked Perez, "Ray, is there anything else?" Perez then went into some details about the Ovando shooting, which was basically an attempted murder, and he didn't stop talking. Rafael Perez and Nino Durden had a run-in with Ovando on October 11th, 1996. The next day, it is reported that Durden and Perez entered the apartment of Ovando, who was an 18th Street member, and shot him, thereby leaving him paralyzed and in a wheelchair. Ovando was sentenced to 23 years in prison for allegedly firing at the officers. His case was overturned due to the Rampart scandal investigation. And in November 2000, Ovando received a $15 million award in damages. At that time, it was the largest police misconduct settlement in LAPD history. On March 18, 1997, undercover LAPD officer Frank Liga, who was white, shot and killed plainclothes Rampart crash officer Kevin Gaines, who was black. Liga said he did so in self-defense after a road rage incident by Gaines. According to Liga and other witnesses, Gaines' vehicle pulled up to Liga's vehicle and flashed gang signs. Liga reportedly ignored him and drove off, but Gaines followed him, brandishing a .45 pistol. Liga then took out his own gun, hauled for backup using a hidden radio in his undercover vehicle, after he said he heard Gaines shout, "I'll cap you," slang for "I'll shoot you." Liga then fired his duty weapon into Gaines' vehicle twice, and one of the bullets struck Gaines in his heart, which turned out to be a fatal gunshot wound. Inside of Gaines' car, it is rumored that a Death Row's Greatest Hits CD was found inside the vehicle that he was listening to at the time of the confrontation. Gaines had been driving Suge's ex-wife, Sharitha Knight's Green Montero, when he was shot. A follow-up investigation found that Gaines had been involved in at least 4 similar road rage incidents, threatening drivers by brandishing his gun. People should understand, Internal Affairs had already been looking into Gaines for years, and Gaines knew this, and flippantly had the license plates on his car read ITSOKI, which stood for "It's Okay, Internal Affairs," as he knew they were watching him. The investigation revealed that Gaines had previously been associated with Death Row Records, but in all actuality, Gaines associated more with Sharitha and Snoop Dogg, who by that time had left the Death Row Records label. LAPD brass issued work permits to officers from 1991 to 1993. But after some controversial incidents with death row, Chief Bernard Parks issued a special order stating that LAPD officers had to stay away from working with death row. Within 3 days of the incident, the Gaines family hired famous attorney Johnny Cochran from the O.J. Simpson case, and they filed a wrongful death lawsuit against the city of Los Angeles for $25 million. The city eventually settled with the family and Cochran for $250,000. Liga was very upset at this because he was accused of being a racist and did not get an opportunity to clear his name in trial. Then on November 6, 1997, almost $750,000 was stolen in an armed robbery of a Los Angeles Bank of America. After only 1 month of investigation into this robbery, it was found out that Erlen Romero, the friend of Officer David Mack, was involved in assisting in the crime. Mack was the mastermind of this robbery and tried and convicted and sentenced for over 14 years in federal prison. He never revealed the whereabouts of that money, but allegedly bragged that he'd be a rich man upon his release, which occurred in May 2010. On February 26, 1998, Rampart crash officer Brian Hewitt brought Ismael Jimenez, another member of the 18th Street Gang, into the Rampart police station for questioning. According to Perez's later testimony, Hewitt got off on beating down suspects. In the course of questioning, it is alleged that Hewitt beat Jimenez while he was handcuffed until he vomited blood. Subsequently, Hewitt was fired from the LAPD, and Jimenez was awarded almost $250,000 in a civil settlement with the city of Los Angeles. Hewitt ended up serving time in federal prison for his actions, as well as the distribution of drugs and conspiracy to commit murder. He has also since been released. LAPD officials discovered that 8 pounds of cocaine were missing from their evidence room, and soon detectives focused their investigation on Rafael Perez. Chief Parks had established an internal investigative task force in May of 1998, and a subsequent audit of the LAPD evidence room revealed another pound of cocaine missing that had been booked into evidence. And it was then that they became very concerned that Perez and other officers had been working for death row records, robbing banks, and stealing cocaine. Approximately 5 months later, on September 8, 1999, following a mistrial, Perez agreed to cut a deal with prosecutors. He pled guilty to cocaine theft in exchange for leniency after he provided information about 2 bad shootings and giving up 3 officers in the crash unit for alleged criminal activity. For this deal, Perez ended up getting only 5 years in prison, as well as was provided immunity from further prosecution with the exception of murder. Over the next 9 months, Perez met with investigators more than 50 times and provided more than 4,000 pages of testimony against other crooked cops. Among the many actions, it was found that Perez had framed members of the Temple Street Gang as being associated in the murder of Mexican Mafia associate Miguel Lizard Malpavon. This incident allegedly took place at the McDonald's on Alvarado Street, whereby these 4 Temple Street members were accused by Perez of planning the murder of Lizard, who was trying to collect street taxes from local gangs. There's also allegations of cover-up in the Rampart scandal by Chief Bernard Parks and other senior members of LAPD. On September 19, 2000, the Los Angeles City Council voted 10-2 to accept a consent decree by the U.S. Department of Justice to oversee and implement reforms within LAPD for a period of 5 years. The Justice Department, which had been investigating LAPD since 1996, agreed not to pursue a civil rights lawsuit against the city. Then Los Angeles Mayor Richard Riordan and Chief Bernard Parks allegedly opposed the consent decree, but were forced to back down after facing overwhelming support from the city council. The consent decree was administered by a private company called Kroll, and many people feel the consent decree only made some people rich, but did not necessarily improve the system. And as a result, multiple negative reports on LAPD were generated. As a result of the Rampart scandal, approximately 140 civil lawsuits were filed against the city of Los Angeles, costing the city over an estimated $125 million in settlements, and 106 criminal convictions were overturned based on Perez's testimony. In other words, it was suspected that the arrests and convictions were based on falsified reports and planted evidence. The damage to the department was extensive, and is felt even today. The scandal caused not only damage to LAPD, but to many surrounding agencies, as many in the public just assumed that all police departments acted like this. And in addition, I've been told by my peers there were many problems finding enough police gang experts who had not testified in some of these tainted cases. And there was other collateral damage. During his sentencing, Perez apologized to the public, the court, and the judge for his inappropriate actions, stating, "Whoever chases monsters should see to it in the process that he does not become a monster himself." And with that, this is Gabe Morales signing off. Gangsters, cops, and politicians.